Tristan Kumar's Dying Planet, The Season of Chaos. Narrated by Tristan Kumar. Part 24. The Web. "We're here," Jamal said as we pulled up to the Harry Reid International Airport outside of Las Vegas. He parked his car and we both walked inside. Our flight would leave at around 1 p.m., but it was only around 11:57 a.m. He sat down and looked around. "I'm gonna go look around," I said to Jamal. "Okay, just be back around 12:50 then," he nodded. I smiled at him and turned around and walked out. I walked by many slot machines on my way out of the terminal. Eventually, I ended up in the shopping portion of the airport. I looked around and eventually came across a sunglasses store. "Hello, can I help you?" the lady running the shop said. "Oh, no, I'm just looking." I looked around at all the sunglasses of different types, but suddenly heard someone scrambling around on the floor. I spun around and saw a teenage boy being dragged by security guards out of the airport. "No, let me go! I need to catch this flight," he said. "What is the number on your flight then?" the security guard said. "It's flight 203, he yelled. "Got it. We'll tell that to the officers at the front desk and you can rearrange your flights after you answer our questions," the guard said. "No! I need to get on that flight, now! You don't understand," he yelled at them. "What don't I understand about this?" the guard said as he held up a metal tesseract with a red glowing out of it. My eyes widened. "It's a bomb, for crying out loud," he said. "No, it isn't. Please, wait," the boy said, but it was too late. He was dragged into the elevator. I watched as the doors closed, covering his face. I looked back at the sunglasses. I had seen that box before because it was the thing that had gotten me out of where I was before. I looked into the mirror and saw someone looking at me behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. When I looked back at the mirror, they were still there, though. Suddenly, everyone else in the large room seemed to vanish. The space felt so abandoned all of a sudden. I felt a shiver over my body as the figure in the mirror started to get closer to me. The figure placed its hand on my shoulder, and I felt a cold chill run through my spine. I still couldn't see the figure's face. I felt a shiver over my body as the figure in the mirror started to get closer to me. The figure placed its hand on my shoulder, and I felt a cold chill run through my spine. I still couldn't see the figure's face because it was covered in shadows. Eventually, they looked up into the mirror. I saw myself, but also another version of myself. I turned around, and there, the version of myself was in front of me. Another Sylvie. "Who are you?" I asked. "You know that answer," the other Sylvie responded calmly. "If you're me, then who am I?" I asked. "That's not the question you should be asking," the other Sylvie said. "What do you mean?" I asked curiously. "The question that you should have asked is, what are you?" the other Sylvie said. Now, I was really confused. "You are not the original version of Sylvie," the other Sylvie continued. "Let me catch you up to speed," she said. She pointed to her left, and I looked. In the darkness, I saw a girl hiding on a ship. "Long ago, there was a little girl named Sylvie. Us. Her parents died, so she got on a ship and flew off the dying planet." I watched intently as the girl talked with a young boy. She eventually met Rai, a young boy who was also on the ship with her. They both helped each other and also fought together when the time came. The image showed Sylvie telling Rai to shoot her. Sylvie had a red blob absorbing her as she cried. They both died, but somehow returned to another life. Rai took Sylvie through many experiences. Eventually, she was brainwashed and given memories and a life that she never wanted. The image showed Sylvie in a black dress looking out on the city of Las Vegas while Rai came up the stairs behind her. She suffered living the dangerous life with Rai, and it eventually got her killed again. The image showed Sylvie inside a metal body floating in the sky with Rai. The capsule exploded, and my eyes widened. "You obviously don't know any of this, but there is only one thing that you do know," she explained. The image now showed Jamal carrying her through the wreckage, the only memory that she had. "The thing you don't know is that," she started, but suddenly disappeared. "Stop," I said. The area slowly started to light up, and the next time I blinked, everything was back to normal. I looked at my watch, 12:39 p.m. I still had time to change my future, so I went after the only thing I knew. "How did you bring a bomb through security?" a security guard yelled at a young boy in the room. "I already told you, it's not a bomb. It's an energy core. I'm trying to get it to Los Angeles," he said. Yeah, nice excuse, kid, the guard said as he paced around the room. I snuck into the room where the kid whose name I had just figured out was Rye was being interrogated. I went to the wall next to the room and suddenly felt energy pulsing through my hands. I put them against the wall. I closed my eyes as the lights started to flicker. Eventually, the same red energy emitted from my hands, and in the blink of an eye, the wall had a hole through it. The security guard had his gun pointed at me. He shot his bullet, but it soared through the red energy and disappeared. I jumped at him and slammed my hand into his chest. He started to get sucked into the energy, and after a couple of seconds, fully vanished. "Who are you?" Rice said in the corner, trying to stay away from me. I'm Sylvie, I said as I helped him up. I broke the window with the energy from my hands, and we ran back into the airport shopping center. I ran to the gate for Flight 203. We both stopped, and I waited for him to go. Before he ran to the plane, he turned around and asked, "Why are you doing this for me?" It's what friends do," I said. He looked at me in utter confusion. He shrugged and waved at me as he jogged to the gate. He scanned his ticket and got on the plane. I watched as the plane took off. I looked at my watch, and it read 12:55 p.m. I quickly jogged back to my gate and found Jamal waiting for me. "Hey, you ready?" he asked. "Definitely," I said. We both boarded the plane, and after around an hour, we arrived at the Los Angeles International Airport in Los Angeles. We both got off the airplane and caught a taxi. As we headed away from the airport, I looked up and saw another plane landing. It eventually landed, but the wheels caught fire and the plane couldn't slow down. Jamal and I both watched as the plane rolled into the grass beyond the runway and past a railroad. The plane eventually stopped, but immediately caught fire afterward. I looked in fear as I watched the plane burn. Suddenly, I saw a window in the plane get busted open. A metal cube was thrown out of it, and a boy crawled out. My eyes widened as I jumped out of the car. Jamal tried to yell at me to get back in, but I had continued to run. I jumped the fence and ran down the runway. I saw an ambulance drive down the runway, and I grabbed onto the back of it barely. Luckily, the medics didn't notice me, so we rode to the railway together. Suddenly, a train started speeding along the rails. The ambulance tried to speed up, so I tightened my grip on the side of the ambulance. I looked off to the side of the ambulance and saw that the train would pass by before we could make it. Around 20 feet before we reached the railway, the ambulance screeched to a stop. It slowed down and stopped right in front of the moving train. Through the cracks of the train, everyone in the ambulance could see an explosion. I heard the driver's ambulance start to curse loudly. It sounded like the driver laid his head down on the steering wheel when the passenger firefighter said, "No backup is needed. We got hit by a soul train." The passenger hung up the radio as he looked at the driver. "It was a kid," the driver said. "I know," the passenger said. They started to turn around and drive back up the runway. Near the taxi, I jumped off and jumped the fence again. I hopped back in the car. "What was that?" Jamal said. "It was someone I thought I knew," I explained. "You could have been caught, and we both would have been dead," he said. "I'm sorry, it was dumb, I know," I apologized. Jamal sat in silence for a few seconds, and finally said calmly, "You know, I once had a friend like that as well." I looked at Jamal, who was still looking out of the window. "When we were young, he and I used to play games in our neighborhood. But one day, when he was driving in his car, it flipped over. He and his parents were in the car as well, and when the ambulance was going to rescue them, I hopped on to help as well. But a train came by at just the wrong moment, and..." He paused. "You know, in the medical world, there's a term called a soul train. The soul train is a term for when a train stops an ambulance from getting to the victim in time. It's said that if the train stops them from saving them, it means that they needed to be put to rest." "But your friend," I said. "His parents were leaders of a gang dealing with gun trade and all. It doesn't matter. What I'm saying is that I'm sorry for your loss, for whoever you thought that was," he explained. I nodded, and he signaled for the taxi driver to continue driving. I didn't realize that he had been there the whole time, so now I felt even worse. I didn't mind it. The kid was probably doing some evil with that cube, but I just led him to the slaughter. I looked out of the window as we continued. We eventually arrived at the University of Southern California. Jamal paid the driver, and we walked in. We walked to a door and opened it. We walked in on a lecture by a professor in the front. The room was pretty dark with a bunch of students inside, listening intently. "So, if you want a classic example of how wormholes work, look no further, for here is what you need to know," the professor said. The students watched eagerly as Jamal and I stood in the back. "So, a wormhole is basically a hypothetical connection between widely separated regions of space-time. And, as you can see here, The professor took a paper from his desk and showed it to the room. This is regular space. Empty, plain, dark, emo as you kids call it, he finished. Some students chuckled. If I want to get from this point, he drew a dot on the paper, to this point, he drew another dot farther away from the first dot. Then it'd take too long. But if I could theoretically fold this paper, he said as he folded the paper. Then he took a pencil and shoved it through the two dots, forming an instant connection. And voila, he finished. The students nodded in understanding. And I don't want to hear you say that you've seen this example before in some stupid movie or TV show. I know. That's all the time we have now. Get out of here, he joked as the lights turned back on. The students grabbed their books and left the room. Jamal and I started walking down the stairs to the professor at the bottom of the stairs. Professor! Jamal exclaimed joyfully. The professor turned around and smiled. He had small white streaks in his hair, glasses, and a beard. Well, if it isn't my favorite genius 15-year-old. How are you doing, Jamal? He said. I'm fine, Professor, Jamal said. Please, the professor said. Call me Chris. I looked suspiciously at this man and realized that he was the same Chris from my dream with Jamal in Las Vegas, but this version of him was younger. And who are you, young lady? Chris asked me. Sylvie. This is Sylvie, and she is here to finish our project, Jamal explained as I waved to Chris. You mean, Chris said as he got more severe and quieter. Yes, multi-labs can happen. But I still beg you not to name it that, Jamal said. Wait, what's this? Multi-labs? I jumped in. Chris started. It's our company about multiversal technology, which Chris dumbly named Multi-Labs, which is so not creative, Jamal interrupted Chris. It's a good name, right? Chris said. Aaron, Xander, and I all made it in a bar some months ago. Exactly! Whatever happens in a bar stays in a bar. Don't you know that? Jamal responded. That's for something else, Chris argued. Anyway, Jamal abruptly said, changing the subject. Speaking of Aaron and Xander, where are those fools? Where they always are, Chris said. That poor kid, Aaron said. And those people. They didn't deserve to die, Xander said. At least we got the energy core we needed from that kid, Aaron said. But the kid still died, Xander said. Xander started, but he heard the door open. Jamal, Chris, and I walked into the cafeteria. There they are. Those lazy boys won't ever get up, Chris said. Professor, Aaron started. Brother, Xander acknowledged as he nodded at his brother. We all stood in silence. Who are you? Aaron said to me. I'm Sylvie, I said. Xander went up to Chris and whispered something in his ear. He whispered back, and they both nodded. So, Sylvie, Aaron said. I'm Aaron Rodgers. Geez, you don't have to introduce both your first and last name to everyone, Aaron, Chris criticized as they both smiled. Okay, follow us. We have something cool to show you, Jamal said. He led the boys and me to another room. In this other room, there was a large disc on the table. The disc was silver and seemed to be very sturdy when connecting to the other table. Here's what we've been working on, Chris said. Inside the cube, red light seemed to emit. All we've needed is an energy source, Xander said. Until now, Aaron finished. So, you want me to help you? I asked. I mean, Chris said as the men stood with their hands in their pockets, looking around shyly. If you want to. I thought about it for a second, but finally decided to say, All right. They looked at each other excitedly, and then waited for me to finish. What do you need? Immediately after I agreed, all of the men ran out of the room in a hurry, while Jamal stayed in the room. Before I could ask why they left, Jamal said, All right, what we need you to do is control that energy of yours and transfer it into this baby here, he said as he patted the metal disc on the table. The men ran back into the room with a bunch of materials to screw down the combined forces. Once they settled, Jamal looked at me and nodded. All of the men looked at me patiently. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I faced the palms of my hands toward me and imagined the energy pulsing through my veins. I eventually started to feel the heat on my hand. I opened my eyes and saw the red energy. I carried the energy to the disc. Suddenly, the disc opened up and revealed a metal tesseract with a red glowing energy coming from it rose to form the disc. I looked at it suspiciously, wondering what these men were going to do with these powers. Suddenly, my hand started to shake and the energy started to grow. The men flinched as it reached for them. It was too late now, so I moved toward the disc and forced the energy down into the cube. The cube began to shake as I stepped back. I felt all of the energy in my body almost disappear. The men gathered around the box and started to work on it. Jamal and Aaron picked up the cube, while Chris put a smooth metal covering below it. Then Xander put a covering on the top of the box. The container started to rustle more and more as they went. I stepped back in astonishment. Finally, all of the men grabbed nails and drills and started drilling the box shut. One of them knocked the nails down to the ground. Some groaned and complained while others silently cursed under their breath as the one who had dropped the nails quickly picked it up. Finally, the men sloppily finished the container and set it down. They threw down their safety goggles and threw their arms up in the air. They all had wide smiles across their faces as they looked at the box. I looked as well, but just saw a smooth silver box. "Now what?" I asked, breaking the men's silent party. "Now," Chris said. "Look." He pushed a button on the top and a small silver ball came out. The men smiled, even more, seeming that they accomplished the task of a small machine dispensing a silver ball. Anyway, I watched as Chris took the ball and showed it to me and the other men. "Lady and gentlemen," Chris said as he tossed the ball on the ground. The ball rolled, and eventually a small red beam shot into the air at our eye level. "I'd like to introduce you, too," he said as the beam started firing and a small web started to form across the space in the air. I stared at it curiously as the web spread across the room. "To the world of multiverse technology!" Chris exclaimed. Everybody's jaws dropped in awe. "Here, come closer and take a look," Chris said as he ushered me toward the web. I slowly walked around it and waved my hand around it. It felt silky, yet it disintegrated the moment I touched it. "This sounds weird, but put your head inside of it," Xander said. I stuck my head inside of it and looked around. Inside, there was a whole new world leading to a universe in the multiverse. I took my head out in shock. "As you can see," Chris said, "we are now going to live the most luxurious years of our lives. Good job, everyone," Chris said, and all the boys exclaimed as well. I looked back at the web and wondered what other universes laid out there. This episode was recorded by Tristan Kumar. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to check out the final part in Act 5. And, thank you so much for listening. Bye.